Well, it's an 86%. That's right.
Oh, so you're feeling confident.
I'm in.
I got you, especially with girls, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's 5 o'clock.
Recording in progress.
We're going to start our special meeting to get our first look at budgets and the LCAP for next year. We will not be taking action on these items, but we will have, a thorough introduction to everything. And Meg, are you with us?
Recording in progress.
Yes, I am. I had to figure out how to unmute.
I have the opposite problem. I have to mute myself. Let's see, wait a minute. I think I've done it now. Okay, so I guess actually on the agenda there is time for public comment now if there are items not on the agenda that people want to.
Do we need to do like roll call and that kind of thing first?
Oh, you're right, thank you.
Just an idea.
It's a great idea. We've called to order, but we need to call the roll. So, Aaron, would you please help us with that?
Student trustee Horn?
Yeah.
Trustee Griffin?
Here?
Trustee Morton?
Here.
Trustee Gay?
Here.
Trustee Ohm? Trustee Schaefer?
Here. And Trustee Morton, I think under the new rules, since you're attending remotely, you have to give a brief description of the reason why you can't be here in person.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have had a pretty bad cold this week. It's not COVID. I've tested myself about 5 times.
Well, thank you for participating in this way. I think, as I understand the new laws, you're limited to doing this twice in a calendar year. Okay, so now we need to approve the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, or would someone make a motion to approve the agenda as written?
I'll move to approve the agenda as written.
I'll second.
Aaron, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Trustee Griffin?
Yes.
Trustee Morton?
Yes.
Trustee Gay?
Yes.
Trustee Schaefer?
Yes. So we have a timed item for parent community comment. I don't see anyone in the audience here who is wanting to make that comment. Is there anyone online? All right, we'll go ahead then with the public hearings. And we'll open first the public hearing regarding the LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Plan. We'll be talking about this later, but the public hearing is a different process. Is there anybody here who would like to address the board during the public hearing? Hearing none, we'll close that hearing and open the public hearing 3.2 regarding the 23-24 district budget, including the MCN community network budget. Again, is there anybody who would like to address the board at this time on this subject? No one's online. So we'll close that hearing and move to 4.1, where we get a detailed look at the budget from our business manager. Are you ready, Meg?
Yes. Let's see, host disabled participant screen sharing. This one. Sure. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Ew, what is that? Okay. So this first section of this presentation is all about the estimated actuals for the current year. And so this is going to go over where we were at second interim and where I think we'll end up when we close the books. So the first column on the left is obviously second interim and then estimated actuals. This is a screenshot of the revenues. So since second interim, property taxes have been certified by the county, and timber tax came in 158,000 higher than we were projecting. So most of this gain here is due to that timber tax. The other taxes were slightly lower, and so overall we were up $130,000. We had a slight adjustment to EPA, and then in our federal revenues, they were pushed up a little bit because I am using more of the COVID funds this year by about $30,800. And then we're going to end up with some amount of carryover in Title I. And so that brings it down because I take it out of the budget. So we've increased federal revenue by about 10,000. And then we have a big increase here in state revenue. You can see at second interim, we were projecting 753,000. And by closing, I think it's going to be at 1.4 million, 1.5 million. So this has to do with the recognition of the timing of the recognition of revenue. So in my budget projections, I was only recognizing the revenue as I thought we were going to spend it. But a lot of the dollars now have plans. One of them in particular is this ELOP. We didn't have a plan previously, so I didn't really want to recognize it. The pre-K planning grant, that was kind of hanging out there, but I didn't want to recognize it because we didn't have a plan to spend it. So all these things now we have plans to spend. The art music instructional material block grant, we've received about half of it. And the learning recovery block grant, we've received all of it. So you'll see later on in the presentation that these two sources of revenue from the state are on the slate to be taken away from us, to be partially taken away from us. And then local revenues are increased by donations, reimbursements as we receive them. So we have revenues of about 10.4 million compared to 9.4 million at second interim. And then we go on to expenditures. If you guys have questions, just stop me. Then we'll go on to expenditures. So for salaries, for certificated, I added some for additional duty and sub costs that are kind of trending a little bit higher. And then in classified salaries, we had an open bus driver position and an open social worker aid position. So we weren't able to hire those. So I removed those from the budget. The benefits, go in tandem with those actions. The books and supplies, services and operations, books and supplies specifically serve some services and operations. We're using restricted funds that we had in fund balance are being spent. So that's what increased these. Part of the services and operations was also an increase to transportation. We have a bus rental from Fort Bragg that we need to pay for, and then we had some repeater work and some other work. And because we had this open bus driver position, I didn't budget these because I knew this position wasn't being filled. So they kind of offset, and everything's just now in the proper category. And then finally, with the ELOP money having a plan, we purchased 2 new vehicles to help support that kind of after-school program. So since second interim, our expenditures have gone up to 11 million as opposed to 10.9 million.
Question for you, Meg.
Yes?
So the 700,000 or so revenue increase, where is that being shown in expenditures?
So, okay, so some of it's not being shown in expenditures. So like this art and music block grant, this 135,000, I had recognized part of, no, not that one, sorry. There's too many money. Okay, sorry. That one, I have not recognized any of it, but that one we weren't planning on spending until 23-24. So that $135,000 is just sitting in fund balance. The Learning Recovery Block Grant, we've been spending part of that for the elective position at the K-8. So that's what's been funding that position for 22-23. And then we had planned to spend more of that in 23-24 and in the out years. Since I have it here, the Learning Recovery Block Grant is going to be reduced by about 32%. So of the 378 we've already received, we're going to have to give 150,000 back to the state. And that's likely going to happen next year. And then the Art and Music Block Grant, what we've received so far, this 135, they're saying that's all we're going to receive. And that's about half of what the original estimate was. But these dollars really are kind of sitting in the general fund. They're just sitting there waiting for us to spend them.
Okay, thank you.
Meg, is that certain now that we will lose the rest of the first and the 150,000 has to go back on the second?
Well, it's not certain until the governor signs the budget, but it probably is.
Okay.
To some degree. So, Jim, so what you're looking for, Jim, is this number here. So you can see our excess, our revenues less expenditures versus second interim and currently has increased by 768,000. So this is basically the extra dollars that we were getting. So it's down here in this restricted fund balance. And that's where it will sit until we spend it or
Okay,
pay it
thank you.
back.
I appreciate it.
So this basically is where we're going to end up. Before we had an excess or a deficit of 1.4 million. Now we have a deficit of about 680,000. Again, most of that is going to fund balance. So now we're going to move on to the governor's budget. And so his budget for the May revise has gotten slightly worse than what he was projecting in January. And the projection now is for state revenues to fall by 31.5 billion as opposed to 22.5 billion in January. The Prop 98 guarantee for schools continues to stay in a test 1 year, so schools will get about 38% of the state general fund dollars. And because those dollars are lower, the guarantee to schools is about $2 billion lower. So these are kind of the ways here, how he's going to close the gap, how he's going to make up for this shortfall. So he's going to have reductions, and that's what he's doing. He's taking back money from us. They're going to delay spending and borrow and use some of their reserves. They're not going to dip into the rainy day fund reserve, but they are going to dip into this other safety net reserve. And so for schools, the LCFF base is going to, he's going to fund the full COLA that they've been projecting, 8.22%. And again, this really doesn't impact us per se in terms of us receiving money because we're basic aid, but it impacts the way we calculate our LCFF funding and our supplemental concentration funding, if you will, and that's what plays into the LCAP. He's planning on staying the course for these new ongoing programs that he's implemented, the UTK, the ELOP program, and Universal Meals for All. And then here is the cuts I was talking about to the Art Music Block Grant and the Learning Recovery Block Grant. So this is really what we're losing. So we're losing about $287,000. And again, this year, the state is giving schools no relief in the pension costs. So this will be kind of a quick overview again of the local control funding formula. And again, this is what plays into the LCAP. This is how we determine what are the dollars we have to include in our LCAP. So there's three components of the LCFF. It's the base grant, which is determined here and which receives the COLA. So if you do this calculation, the 23-24 base grant is generally about 8.22% higher per grade span. The supplemental grant, you receive 20% of the base grant per student for each unduplicated student we have. So English learner, low income, homeless, foster youth. We receive 20% of whatever grade span they're in. The concentration grant is another step up. So if you have a unduplicated student base over 55%, you receive another 50% for that group of students. And generally, Mendocino Unified has never hit this concentration grant level. We've always stayed within this supplemental grant. We've never hit this 55%. So for 23-24, the projection is that we are going to hit that. And so this is kind of what the calculator looks like. But if we look over here, this is 23-24, and this is 22-23, and we go over 55. So now we're coming into the concentration area. In previous years, we've always been lower. I think in 22-23 budget adoption, we were projecting we would be at like 48% unduplicated. And now as time goes on through school and, the data is reported to CalPADS, it's looking like it's going to be higher, but we're still not hitting concentration yet in this 22-23.
Meg, could I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
And I know a lot of this is sort of hypothetical LCFF calculation, but I've heard the term unduplicated students a lot. Is that referring to the idea that a person might be both an English language learner and low income, but you still only count that person once?
Yes, that's exactly what it means.
Okay, thank you.
We count each student in those categories just once.
Thanks.
Meg, I find it very interesting that we're finally getting into the concentration level. Do we have any particular reason why this is happening? What the change in our student body is that's pushing that? I mean, I would think that, is it just better counting, more accurate evaluation of each family?
Right. So Jason might be able to answer this better than I can, but I think that could be one part of it, as they get better with the CalPADS data and they have history in the CalPADS data, that could be a part of it. I'm wondering, is our English language, because these are the categories: English language learner, low income, and homeless foster youth. So, are we kind of hitting it in low income English learners? I'd have to go back and look. I'd have to go pull all the data and look.
I don't have the exact reason here, but I would guess that we're having a lot of families who are having to live with relatives. So our homeless numbers, I think, are up, as well as just our low income. We have families who are just needing to double up with relatives, I think. So.
Well, it'd be nice to know what those numbers are, just because I think it's a shift in how we think of ourselves as a district. And I'm glad that we're on top of the demographics, but I think the more we understand them and pay attention to them, the better response we'll have.
Good point.
So with the higher demographics, if we were an LCFF funded school, we would see these dollars as real new dollars to provide services to this concentration of students. But since we're not an LCFF funded school and we're basic aid, these are the dollars that we have to carve out. So down here, this little box down here, this kind of tells about the amounts that we have to increase or improve services, and that's what LCFF and the LCAP in particular is all about. How are you going to increase or improve services for your unduplicated students, your supplemental concentration students? And so when we make this calculation, we are calculating how many dollars do we have to pull out of our tax dollars, if you will, because that's kind of what it is. In our situation, how many dollars do we have to pull out to provide services for the unduplicated students, and how many dollars do we carve out to put in the LCAP and plan for in the LCAP? So as we close out 22-23, that number is about 441,000, and it equates to about a 10.7% increase or improved services. In 23-24, based on these numbers, that number goes up to about 590,000 or 13.8% increase or improved services. So from the calculator, these dollars down here in red, in green are LCFF entitlement. And this is what we're going to compare on this next slide to our tax revenue. So this down here is our LCFF entitlement as calculated on the previous page. But because our property taxes here are higher, that's what we're being funded at. We are being funded at our property taxes plus the state aid that we received back in 12-13, not increased for COLA. So this number has not increased since 12-13. We also get a piece of EPA, the Education Protection Act funding. And this then becomes what our funding source is, our LCFF funding source, because we're basic aid. So you can see that, we are funded higher than we would be if we were not basic aid. But it also means, when we come back here, we don't benefit from receiving more dollars than we did in the previous year.
And part of that is also the decline in enrollment.
Yes.
If we had the same number of students we had 10 or 15 years ago, those numbers would be a lot closer, or maybe even
Yes.
tipping the other
Yes.
way.
Yes. Any questions, any other questions on this whole LCFF? Okay.
So I guess,
Yeah.
you had a slide earlier that was talking about the increase after the concentration, and it seemed to me it was a higher percentage than the supplemental.
This
And
one? Oh, yeah, here.
Right.
So for the supplemental students, we get, whatever grade span they fall in, we would get 20% additional, because, right, each student generates, this level of funding. Each one student generates this level. If that student is also a supplemental student, then we would get another 20% of whatever level that student's at. And then if that student was also in the concentration, we would get another 50% for that student. And so, so the idea being, the concentrate, you have a higher concentration of unduplicated students, so you need more money to help support those services.
So I guess the difference is that the supplemental grant, is a direct percentage of the base, whereas the concentration grant only applies to those students, that number of students who exceed the 55% threshold.
Right.
So if we were
Right.
exactly at 55%, there'd be no concentration grant. It's only when we're exceed that.
Over. Right.
Right?
Right. Okay, so from here, we'll be talking about next year's budget, the 23-24 budget. So we're going to start with revenues. And so these are the assumptions that I made for revenue, that secured property taxes are going to go up 2%. The unsecured tax, up probably about 1.5% or so. Timber tax I brought back down because timber tax really is should be looked at as like one-time revenue. It fluctuates based on how much harvesting is going on. And so, back in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, this kind of fell out and it stayed low for a while. And then, it's been coming back probably like in the last 7 years or so. We suspended the deferred maintenance transfer of $75,000 in 23-24 to help support the one-time health insurance cap increase. But I will remind that in 22-23, we doubled up on the transfer to deferred maintenance for a particular project that we didn't do. So it's kind of, I look at it as it kind of being flat. Federal revenues were reduced for one time. And then in 23-24, we really start to project using Fund 17 kind of in earnest. And that's that. So this is what the revenues look like. It estimated actuals, here's the revenue we just went over, and this is what it's going to be in 23-24. We have the 2% secure tax increase, and because of the reduction in the timber tax, our taxes are really actually lower than what they were last year. LCFF, EPA kind of stays the same. Our federal revenues are down, state revenues are down. And then local revenues, they kind of hold at this level, and then everything else that we receive is kind of like donations and whatnot. So this year, we're planning on transferring in $238,000 from Fund 17. So with Fund 17 dollars, we have about 9.5 million in revenue compared to 10.3 last year. But we also had that big one-time money there in state. Our revenue stream without using Fund 17 is 9.2 million.
So Meg, going forward, is the 9.2 million a good target for where we need to hold our expenses to be neutral?
Yeah, as it turns out, that's how it works out, because eventually in this proposed budget year, we still have some one-time revenue, one-time COVID dollars in here. In 23-24, we end up that's the last year we'll spend it all. And the state revenue, we may have some lingering dollars in the state revenue, but yeah, it turns out that 9.2, like a high 9.1, 9.2, and when we get out further, it's a higher 9.2. That looks to be the recurring revenue. One thing I want to point out in this 23-24 revenue and the state revenue, this is a big negative because 150,000 of it is the payback to the state for the Learning Recovery Block Grant. Okay, so for expenditures, for 23-24, we implemented part of the reductions that we had talked about at second interim. So we implemented part of them. Step and column was applied. For benefits, the STRS rate stays flat. The PERS rate is increasing by about 5%. The SUI, the unemployment rate, is actually coming back down. So I don't know if you'll remember a couple of years ago, after the pandemic or somewhere kind of in there, this unemployment rate, which had always historically been kind of like at this 0.05%, jumped to 1.23%. And it was up there for a couple of years because there was some kind of error in the unemployment department. And so it's starting to come back down. So it's down 90%. And, I missed a thing. It's down 90%. And then the workers' comp rate has increased this year by about 9%, from 3.5% to 3.9%. And then materials and supplies, adjusted for one-time expenditures and the use of reserves. So this is what our expenditures.
Going back to workers' comp,
Uh-huh.
is that from our district's experience, or is that the JPA's experience that is impacting that increase?
This is the district's experience that's impacting it.
Okay.
So usually what the JPA does, is they calculate all the rates, and they calculate all the rates with the district's experience, and then they try and smooth it so that the increase per district per year is not so great. So, but it really is, based on our experience, and yeah. So here we are with what our expenditures are going to be. Certificated salaries are down slightly. Classified salaries are up a little bit. Employee benefits, are kind of, they move in tandem with these two. And here, books and supplies, I've reduced for one-time expenditures. And then, this transfer out is lower. Transfers out don't generally change much, but it's lower this year because in 22-23, we moved the water project out of Fund 01 and moved it to Fund 40. So our proposed expenditures are 10.5 million as compared to 11 million in 22-23. So then what this slide does is compares, so like this previous slide is comparing where are we at estimated actuals, right? Where's the proposed budget to estimated actuals? And then this slide compares how are we estimating 23-24 at second interim and what that variance is. So at second interim, we were projecting more reductions. So we've added back some reductions. I've had to increase the budget for subs and additional duty. And then I put the compensated absences budget in there. And, it has been running about $30,000 a year. Pre-COVID, I think it was a little lower. So let's see. So in classified, we added back, had net add back of 91,000. And then employee benefits rise in tandem with salaries and benefits. We have the PERS increase in here, and we have the one-time health cap increase. Books and supplies and services and operations are just a little bit lower. So at second interim, we thought our expenses in 23-24 would be 10.1 million, 10.2 million. And in the proposed budget, it's projected to be 10.5 million. So this is the summary of all the different components. So let's see, So here for the budget, for the 23-24 budget year, revenues of 9.4, expenditures of 10.5. We have a net deficit of 1.1 million. We are using some of Fund 17 reserves, and we have an ending balance of 890,000. So the 890,000 is kind of dedicated to these components of ending fund balance: the revolving cash, the reserve for economic uncertainty, which is mandated by law, which is 4% of expenditures and other uses. And then we spend down a good, about half of our restricted reserve. And then this other designation is mostly site accounts. We start with a balance of 878,000 Fund 17. At the end of next year, it's projected to be 639,000. So this over here on the right side really kind of is just, again, comparing where we were at second interim to where we think we're going to be next year. And, a lot of this, we see this big difference here. We were at 613 deficit versus 1.1 million. And again, a lot of it has to do with how we booked revenue.
Meg, that 1.1 million deficit doesn't include the transfer out of the 238,000 from Fund 17, right? So, I mean, the real comparison of what we're going to bring in, what we're going to spend is the 9.2 compared to the 10.5, which is more like 1.3 million. Isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah, so you're right. So really, our deficit is the 1.1 million here plus the 230, right? So that's what gets us, that's really our deficit. And like you're saying, if we compare these two numbers here,
right,
that's our deficit.
Thank you.
So this is just kind of an overview of the multi-year projection. So what I put in your packet didn't include the negotiation, the negotiated line item as per the TA that was recently signed, and it didn't include adding the UTK half an FTE in 24-25. So I updated the multi-year projection, and this came to light during the Finance Committee meeting. So I updated the multi-year projection that's going to go into the final budget. It's not in what you guys have today for today's meeting, but it will be in next week's budget that you're going to approve or not approve. So I'm going to go through this broken down again as before. So this is the multi-year projection, and you can see here that each year we use Fund 17 dollars. Each year I've projected for taxes to increase, secure taxes to increase by about 2%. We reinstate the deferred maintenance transfer in 24-25 and then continue with that through the multi-year projection. Here is where we spend down the final COVID dollars. And so 249, 250, that seems to be our natural level for federal funding. And then here, our state revenue, our net kind of natural level for state revenue is about this 500,000. And again, the reason we're going up in state revenue is because in 23-24 we had to pay back the dollars we've already received. So, so this is kind of all of our natural revenue. So you can see in 24-25, it's about 9.1 million, 25-26, it gets up to about 9.2 million without the Fund 17 transfer. So that's kind of where we need to be thinking about where we need to get a starting point for where we need to get our expenditures to be. But we also need to be mindful of the fact that our revenues aren't increasing a whole lot. And the natural expenditures are probably increasing more than our revenue stream. So natural expenditures being step and column, PERS increases, just general increases in the cost of services, power, lights, gas, paper, all that sort of stuff. On the expenditure side, for 24-25, I built in the level 1 reductions, and we in 23-24 we have one temporary position, and so I built that in. I added the 0.5 FTE for UTK. There's also the level 2 reductions in classified, and then a retirement, and I have the retirement incentive in here. And then the the benefits kind of move in tandem with all of this. So overall, these cuts amount to about, before adding UTK, the cuts amounted to $887,554 of that being in salaries. I added 5% per year to each of the books and supplies and services and operations, just because I think, expenditures are going up. Fuel's going up, all these things are going up, and I think we kind of need to recognize that. So overall, we have in 24-25, 9.7, 9.8 million in revenues, in expenditures, as compared to 10.5 in 23-24. In 25-26, I've added step and column to each category. And I put in this number. This is an amount of additional reductions. This amount, we may decide, later that we need to do more than this. I think we probably will need to do more than this. But with this level of reduction, we have expenditures of 9.4 million as compared to 9.7, 9.8 million in 24-25.
And again, if we're able to make reductions in 24-25, they have double the impact as opposed to waiting until 25-26.
Right. And, obviously the higher level of reduction that we can make earlier is obviously better for us from a budget perspective, from a fiscal perspective. So here's the summary of it, and here we see where our expenditures, our expenditures are continue to trend higher than our revenue, and but in using the Fund 17 dollars, we're able to limit what our deficit is in Fund 01, but again, the deficit really is these two numbers put together, or, comparing the blue revenue stream with expenditures rather than the top revenue stream. So this is where in the reserve line, so as a reserve budget line item is where I put the negotiation reserve. And so this 142 is equal to 2% of salaries and benefits in 24-25 after the reductions have been made. And so, these obviously these numbers can fluctuate. So this is where we are. We have, over the multi-year period, we are spending down about 700,000 of our Fund 17, which is almost 80%. We continue to meet our 4% reserve for economic uncertainty. And then Fund 17, this 179 equates to about another 2% for reserves. So we probably have about 6% reserves at the end of 25, 26. But if this projection comes true and spending and revenues come in at these levels, I don't think having a 6% reserve is going to bode well for 26, 27.
I think you were categorically stronger in the document that was, the state report on the budget. I mean, I think, one, you recommended that the Fund 17 stay equal or above the 4% for economic uncertainty. And, I just can't remember the number of times when you made comments to the fact that we're going in a bad direction because we continue to spend more than we are taking in.
Right. So it would be nice if we could, well, obviously, from my point of view, it would be nice if we didn't have to use Fund 17 at all, if we had, the little revenue fairy came down on us and gave us more money. But we probably will have to use it. But it would be nice if we could, keep at least twice of what the reserve for economic uncertainty is, at all times. And, my hope would be that if we could get our expenditures aligned with our revenue and get it to a place where we can live within whatever our revenue increases are and be able to use that to support, our staff and our services, that we at some point could rebuild Fund 17, because I do think it's really important to have this type of level of reserve, because we're fortunate that we had this. We're fortunate that, the board at the time that they put this away, put it away, because without it, we would have been in dire straits sooner. So I think it's important to have big, stronger reserves. And the GFOA, GFOA is the acronym, and I can't remember what it stands for, but they recommend that basic aid districts hold like a 17% reserve, because we don't get backfilled. If some of our revenue goes away, we're not backfilled by the state. I'm gonna go way back here real quick. So if we were an LCFF funded school and this is fine. If we were an LCFF funded school, and so part of what makes up the funding for an LCFF funded school is the property tax. So they take the property, they make this calculation for LCFF funded schools, and then they take the property tax that the school generates, and the state ponies up the rest of it. Like, so say our school made $3 million in property tax, the state would pony up the $2.3 million to get the school district to this place. For us, if our property tax goes down, nobody ponies up money for us until we get down to these levels. And so it is important, I think, as long as we are a basic aid, and even if we ever fall out of basic aid, to have a larger than recommended reserve. I'm going to move this forward again.
Meg, the $142,000 negotiation reserve, that's showing how much more we would spend in 24, 25, and 25, 26 if we did 2% salary increases for both certificated and classified staff. Is that right?
Yeah, so this $142,000 represents 2% of certificated classified staff at all levels. And like I said, it was calculated after the cuts were made in 24, 25. So what this is doing, it's holding this reserve amount level. Once negotiations happen and there is an amount agreed to, then that amount would come up into the expenditure level here, right? I mean, because right now I don't have it in this expenditure place, because, the budget is supposed to be a picture of what we think is going to happen this year. So I don't really have it up in here yet. It's sitting down here as a reserve, if that makes sense. But it's still a line item in the budget. And, because remember, like we were talking the other day in the finance committee meeting, I was struggling with where to put it, because it truly, we haven't agreed we haven't agreed that it is an expenditure yet, because we haven't negotiated on it. We've negotiated to put a line item in the budget. And so I think this satisfies that without it coming up here, because if we put it up here, if we put it up here, what happens is it gets step and column added to it, and it kind of grows on itself year after year after year. And it's a false sense of growing because we haven't agreed to it yet. We haven't agreed to the expenditure yet. But this is saying we're setting aside this money, and if we agree to it when we negotiate for 24-25, this will move up here, up into the expenditure part. In 25-26, I'll project a new 2%, what the new 2% would be, and we'll put it down in the reserve. Again, a line item in the budget. It's just in the reserve department, if you will, instead of the expenditure department. And, we would do that year after year after year.
I mean, I think the experience we had, with the budget for next year, where we, at second interim, thought we were going to have a certain level of cuts and only actually achieved, 80% of those cuts, speaks something of how difficult it is to make cuts in programs and people. And, the $1.5 million that we have to cut from our current budget in order to be sustainable is going to be very painful. And it's going to be, it's going to take a lot of hard work to make it happen.
Right, I agree. It is very painful, or it is going to be very painful. But we have to do it. If we don't make the cuts, and we don't make a certain level of cuts in 24-25, what's going to happen next year when we get to second interim and when we build our budget, we're going to end up, qualified or negative. So as at every period, we certify as something. So at budget adoption, we don't certify as anything. We approve or not approve a budget is what we do. And the county will approve or not approve our budget in tandem with the LCAP. But at first interim, by first interim, it would be nice to see that we really do have a plan for expenditure cuts, because this budget and multi-year is built on a lot of if and by golly. And, because like you say, as we've seen with the 23-24 budget, we projected we were going to do something. We assumed we were going to do something. And then when we went to go implement it, we realized we couldn't. And so if that happens too many times, we're going to be in trouble. And I think it's obvious, but, I feel like I have to state it. So I think it's something to just be mindful of, because, at first interim, we are going to have to certify as something. And, when you certify as positive, you're saying we will be able to meet our expenditures this year and the 2 subsequent years. If we certify ourselves as qualified, we're saying we may be able to do that. And, maybe qualified is going to be the best way for us to certify ourselves, because really we may be able to do it if we meet all of these spending reductions. So, and then the other one is if we had this multi-year projection, and out here in the last year, we could not maintain this reserve for economic uncertainty, we'd be negative.
Meg, can you go back to the one that has the 900,000 and the 600,000? Yeah. When is the first interim? When do we have to do that? Certify?
First interim is we do it in December 15th. By December 15th, we certify and approve first interim, and then second interim is in March, if we choose to certify ourselves as qualified, we'll have to do a third interim in April. And I think the third interim in April might make you go out one more year because we're so close, but, like last year at second interim, or this year at second interim, we did go out one more year because we knew that we were, needing to go out one more year to look to see where we were going to end up.
So can you just confirm that I'm understanding this right? December of this year, December of 2023, we need to have a plan for how we're going to do about $900,000 in cuts in 24, 25, and another 600,000 in 25, 26.
Yes.
Thank you.
At a minimum.
Right.
For sure, we need to have a solid plan for 24, 25. I would think we would need a solid plan. And I do think that, like at the last meeting, Jason was talking about that the administrators are going to get together and over the summer. And, so I do think we'll have a solid plan. And how solid the plan for 25, 26 needs to be, I think will depend on how solid the plan in 24, 25 is at that point in time. Because if the 24, 25 plan is kind of iffy and we're still just blocking in a number that we have to reduce by, it seems kind of hinky. So I just, if we can have a real solid plan by first interim for 24, 25, I think it would give us all a roadmap because, we do this in December at first interim. We have to have layoff notices by March and, all this stuff happens quickly. So if we have a solid plan, at least we know where we're going, in the next few months.
So Megan, in the state's report, you project attrition in FTEs in both certificated and classified. I don't know if you have a slide here that relates to that, but I found that a very dramatic change.
Right. Okay. So in the multi-year in 24, 25, I do have, I do think I have these level 2 cuts built in. In 25, 26, I thought I had, just this lump sum built in as other adjustment. Let's see. Oop.
Since we saw an 80% actual compared to the planned, I'd
Yeah.
probably divide the deficit by 0.8 and use that as the number. That's what I feel comfortable with,
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find the page, Meg, in the budget that I'm looking at.
I think it might be in the multi-year projection.
I think if you look at page 27 toward the end, where it's it's doing the reviews,
Oh, criterion standard.
right? And we look at let's see, I think there's that page 27 is talking about classified employees. From the current year of 41.9 to the 24-25 budget year of 29.15. So that's a.
Ooh, I need to go check that. I wonder if I typed the wrong number.
Well, and then I'm trying to. There's a similar thing in the certificated. The number of certificated, this is on page 24, the certificated non-management positions FTE
Goes down by
22-23, the current year is 44.9, and you project in 24-25 a drop to 34.4. So that's
Right.
a 24% decrease.
Right.
I just want to be clear what we're talking about, that these are, and that isn't even solving our problem, but it's getting us closer to solving the problem.
Right, right. So what these numbers represent, we have these level 2 cuts that, I have projected for 24, 25. That's where these projections are coming from. So, we have cut some positions or reduced some positions in the 23-24 budget year. And, we're going to reduce some more in the 24-25 year. So, but, things may change depending on the plan that, really is put forward after this summer. I need to go back down and look at this classified one.
No, I understand there are lots
Yeah.
of things that we might do to change those numbers, but I think when you look at 20 to 25% staff reductions, that's a big number, and it may be necessary. It's the only way we can save money, since 86% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits, is to cut people. But I think that it takes some time getting used to that reality.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, when you look at the expenditure side, you can see, books and supplies and services and operations, even if we cut everything out, wouldn't even make a dent in, the amount of cuts we'd have to do.
It seems to me.
Okay, so any other questions?
I was just gonna make one comment. It seems to me we should be aiming at least $1 million for 24, 25, right? Like we can't aim for 887. We can't aim for 900. I think we need to aim for at least $1 million.
Yeah.
That's what I was just saying.
And it has multiple benefits,
We
right?
saw 80% actual compared to the plan. I say take it, divide by 0.8, and that's a ballpark what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, so then these last couple slides are just about our cash flow. So this particular slide is cash flow for the general fund without the use of Fund 17. And so, normally basic aid districts get really low in November, December, anticipating the tax infusion in January. Then they usually get low again kind of in February, March, anticipating the tax infusion in April. So here in November, we get down to almost negative 500,000. And then in December, we're negative cash by 1.3 million. We end, the projection is to end in Fund 01 cash with 613,000. This slide here takes Fund 17 into account as well. And this one doesn't look as bad. We go negative in December. But then we stay positive the rest of the year, and we end, when we look at both funds, Fund 01 and Fund 17, we end the year with 1.3 million in cash. And so this is important because, we need cash to pay our bills. And if we end up using a lot of Fund 17, we end up back in this situation and, potentially even worse. And, kind of as we discussed at the Finance Committee meeting in Mendocino County, even if we go negative cash, the county is still going to pay our bills because they look at, currently anyway, they look at how the whole school fund. So, the school fund kind of supports all the schools. And so they continue to pay all the schools' bills because they know how the school revenue doesn't match the timing of payments. So anyway, so this is something we probably should be keeping our eye on as well when we look at the budget.
You know, on page 18 of you know, that
Criterion standards.
standards review, you know, you make the comment, quote, "Because expenditures exceed revenues, the district is planning on spending down Fund 17 reserves, essentially spending one-time revenues for ongoing expenditures. Reductions in 23-24 were not as great as planned. Steep reductions will be necessary in the next 2 years to align expenditures with revenue, and ongoing diligence in capping spending will be necessary." I think that's, again, words well written.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it. Normally I think it's just MCOE reads it, and once a district gets into trouble, then I think the state will read it or FCMAT will read it. Or if a district were to, you know, certify qualified or negative, I think FCMAT would probably pull out the criterion standards and read them for those districts. So, but it does, you know, this criterion standard really does tell our story. That's the whole purpose of it, is to tell our story and where we are, where we've been, where we're heading, and how we're going to get there, hopefully.
Well, I certainly appreciate, you know, the effort and integrity that you've put into this process, and, you know, not gilding the lily at all.
Well, you're welcome. Okay, so I think that's all I have, unless there's any other questions.
Thank you, Meg. I echo Michael's thoughts.
Yes.
Mark, did you have any comments or questions?
No, I would just like to point out again that it's been said, but if we cut another 100,000 in the first year, that's 200,000 we don't have to cut the year after. Is that correct?
Pretty much. Because it has a cascading effect.
So I think we need to push for more pain in the first year, because the totality in 2 years is less cuts.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a discussion item only. We will plan to adopt our budget on our meeting on the 13th. So if people have brainstorms that, you know, address this quandary, look at it from a different point of view than we're doing, get in touch with staff or get in touch with board members and put your ideas into the mix.
If anyone has an extra 1.5 million, let us know.
There you
We'll
go.
take it.
Okay, so we'll move on to 4.2, which is the MCN budget. And Rob, you're here to present that?
Yes. So this is the Mendocino Community Network budget for the fiscal year 23-24, our budget presentation. So we started out with some budget projections for this year, and we were basically at $2,288,525 for our income. That was our budget projection. Our expenses were expected to be $2,271,397. We also budgeted to give the district $40,000 this year, which we did. That would have left us with a deficit of $22,872. This played out slightly differently, I guess.
I will say we do kind of plan to do better because of a number of different reasons.
But
from
going
the
back
projection.
to that previous slide, was the...
Please, yeah. So I think we'll do better than this minus 22,872. There were a lot of things that were different this year.
Right.
So I can't tell you yet until we close our books how well we'll do. But yeah, so we're gonna move on from that. So here's kind of our 3-year projection moving forward. In 23-24, we've got a projected income of $2,269,619, with some expenses of around $2,188,428. This is projected to give us a profit of around $81,000, with a district donation of $40,000. So this will give us a profit, a projected profit of $41,191. In 24-25, our income is projected to be at $2,360,056 rather. And our expenses will be $2,178,868. This will give us a larger profit than the year before of $181,188, with a district contribution of $40,000. In 24-25, we're projecting a net profit of $141,188. And in 25-26, if things go well, again, these are projections, we're looking at $2,595,193 for our income, and expenses will continue to rise as they do, and we'll be looking at $2,325,803. Well, that'll give us a profit of $269,390. Again, with a district donation of $40,000, that could give us a profit of $229,390. Going back to what Emily said earlier, maybe if things go well, we can increase some of those donation amounts to the district. We'll see when we get there. I don't want to overcommit.
Is our product mix changing?
Our product mix is changing, and we'll further explain that in some of the coming slides, but in a nutshell, we lost the ability to sell new fusion lines. So we've really had to sort of decide how else we can generate some income and keep things going. So we've had to, try and think outside the box a little bit with that.
So you're going to get into that?
We'll get into that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so our fusion budgeting. These are some numbers that show some of the loss of the fusion customers, month to month. Basically, we had a 12-month average of about a loss of 10 customers. The 6-month average was 11, and the 3-month average was about 16. We budgeted for a loss of 15 customers per month from fusion, so we didn't lose that many overall, right? So we did a little bit better there.
Are some of these going to the wireless? Or
Some are going to the wireless, and some are not going to the wireless.
Right.
Yeah. So again, we had an average loss of about 11 per month. We had budgeted for a projected income of $1,255,876, with a projected expense of $832,663. That would have given us a net of $423,213.
So going back, this is for next year, that last slide?
No, this was what was projected.
Because I see
Did you go
23,
back? I'm sorry,
24.
Did you go back, or did you?
That's 22, 23, but that's 23, 24.
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. So we just sort of moved this forward. And yes, this is the projected fusion loss per month. We're going to kind of stick with the same number of loss average. There's a couple reasons for this. These numbers are the way they are because we're seeing a lower trend in the number of fusion losses than we expected. There was also a price increase that was passed along to us, that we passed along to the customers, and so that sort of adjusted these numbers slightly.
We still have 1,500 Fusion customers, or?
A little less than, I think, 1,400 and something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So 11 a month, that's 100 and something, say 130
Yeah, a year.
a year. So you're still going to have over 1,000 Fusion customers throughout this period,
Right.
probably.
Yeah, and you'll see that some of our telecom expenses actually decrease because of that, because of the amount that we have to pay to Sonic, you know. So, and, yeah, that's coming. So I guess we can move on. So our open air numbers for the next year, we're hoping to have an average gain per month of about 10 customers. This will give us a projected income of $303,026. Our projected expense will be $87,300 rather, hopefully giving us a projected profit of $215,726.
How many open air customers do we have?
Right now, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 320 something, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We also recently acquired the customer base from CK, which increased our customer number. And there's more about how that affects some of our budgeting in some of these slides coming up.
But again, you know, even though the number of customers is somewhat, if you take across the two platforms, the number of customers is somewhat the same. You're losing 11, gaining 10.
Yeah.
We're not really seeing enough gain in the open air clients to reach what we have in terms of Fusion customers.
Right. Now, there is something to consider about that, is that because it's a product that we're producing, not reselling of somebody else, we should actually make a little bit more money on each person.
Right.
So it's, you know, it's not necessarily an apples to apples thing, but it's a good point, you know, but it does even itself out a little bit. So in other words, an open air customer is probably worth more to us
Right.
than a Fusion customer.
But I mean, I noticed that Further Reach, for example, in the wireless category is becoming more and more aggressive, I'll say, in terms of trying to hook up customers in remote areas. And do we have plans to tackle some of the areas like 409 and things like that?
We do, and I'll get to that in one of the last slides, just to keep you guessing and wondering what that might be.
Can you flip back to the previous one? So there's 400,000 gross profit with a loss of 11, and then go to the next one? Okay. So the gross profit per is better on those.
Right.
Thank you, Mick. All right, Aaron.
Okay, so these are some income projections. I want to note right off the second line, which is DSL, it's flat. DSL was a product that was turned off. We managed to save about 8 customers, mainly in CompShe. So those people really like it, believe it or not, even though it's slow, it's got a very good response time. So gamer kids prefer that over to like a wireless connection, for instance. So the people that have it, we think they're going to keep it. So in digital voice, which has been a very popular product for us, in 23-24, we expect to take in $179,809. And then our current net for that has been $164,999. So we make a fair amount of money on that. We hope to make another $14,810 off.
And how many digital voice lines do we have?
I don't have that number in my head. Yeah, it's climbing. I believe it's. I'm not even going to guess. I don't have it in my head. I apologize. I don't think I wrote it on my paper here. No, But it's in the hundreds, you know, there's quite a few of digital voice customers. Businesses really like it. It's a lot easier to add a couple of extra phone lines to your business or your house if you have a good internet connection. Teenagers, you know, who want to talk on the phone can do so without running up the cell phone bill.
I think I'm missing something here, Rob, help me out.
Sure.
Why are we seeing our open air projected revenue going down from 22, 23 to 23, 24? What am I missing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the reasons that that's going down is that there's going to be more expenses as we get more and more customers for open air. Let's see, the other thing is that those expenses are made up of paying off for our CK customers that we bought. So we're still in the midst of paying those off. You don't just buy a lot of these customers all at once, otherwise it would kind of break the bank. So that's why you're seeing that, that lower amount there. We're looking at a new product, which is we're calling Y-Frost, or that's the company who produces the product. And basically, this sort of answers your question, you know, are you doing anything new? This is something that we're doing new, which is a non-line of sight wireless product. If you remember the old days when you used to put a TV antenna on your roof, and at least around here, you might be able to pick up Eureka or Santa Rosa. I used to climb way up in the tree and put the antenna. This uses the same technology. A few years ago, the FCC said, no more analog TV stations, everything has to go digital. So that left this spectrum for use. It's uncrowded around here. There were never really a lot of broadcast TV stations. So we're hoping that this will reach out to 409, possibly, and to some other places. We're doing some thorough testing right now, and we'll know more. So that is expected to generate us some income of about, you know, $5,742 in the 23-24 year. And we're not going to make any money on it this year because we literally can't sign anybody up yet.
So you know, one way of measuring growth is the amount of terabytes you're backhauling over a period of time. What's a sense of how MCN is doing in that, you know, regard?
Yeah, so previously we had kind of a metric for that, and it was based on, you know, the number of customers, and each time we increased by a certain number of customers, we would increase an expense by that amount. I spent a lot of time this year making sure that we got into a wholesale program. So we're basically, this year, going to be doubling our amount of bandwidth for the same amount of money. So I've also discovered that by doing that, it gives us more of a burstable circuit, meaning we may not have to use the same metric to increase the amount of internet speed or, you know, juice that we need to provide to our customers, because during the day, the usage goes up, and at night, it generally tends to go down. So, you know, the metric of that is we should be hopefully relatively around the same amount for longer than we expected, which is going to be kind of nice, a savings. So some of our income projections for the next 3 years, analog dial-up is still around. If anybody's interested, you can still sign up for it. We are losing 2 customers a month. I have heard people say in the past that some people feel that it's like a donation to the school by keeping it, and that's great. I believe you do get some bundled email with that too. So, so as you can see, the numbers are pretty much staying kind of flat, you know, dropping off a little bit. At a certain point, and I don't know when this is going to be, it may not be viable to keep it around, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Believe it or not, a few people are still using it, and it suits their needs, and that's great for them. Our digital voice product, we're projecting to increase by about 5 per month. So in 23-24, that'll give us $230,188. And carrying that forward, we'll see $257,260 in 24-25, and $284,332 in 25-26. I will say that we see bursts in the digital voice product where suddenly there's a huge rush of these orders, which is nice. So that could go up and down. That's a conservative, plus 5 per month. If we stick with the Fusion losses that we're looking at, still at an average of about 11 a month, we'll see an income of $1,363,993. In 24-25, you'll see it will go down to $1,180,556, and in 25-26, under $1 million, $997,118.
Is this just the data side?
No, this includes the
The-
data and the phone
And the voice?
portion of, yeah.
'Cause-
And they are a product that is tied together, keep
Right.
in mind. So if you lose one, then the other goes away as
I was
well.
just thinking that we make no profit on the voice. I mean,
Correct, the voice is a pass-through. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's right.
So you're seeing a decrease in revenue for the next 2 years, but you're seeing an increase in profitability for Fusion.
Yes, that is true, because as these customers are kind of leaving, we have less, money that we have to spend to Sonic and to other, and for the data portion and the voice portion. Specifically in the Fusion, I'd written myself a note about this. Basically, in our telecom budget is where the Fusion expenses come from, and so that decreases.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still adding about 2 email accounts per month. So it generates a fair amount of money. At 23-24, we expect to see $190,597. 24-25, I don't have to read off each number, I guess you guys can see
Okay.
the numbers there. I will say that open air, in some of those numbers, we'll see that going up for income. That's adding 10 a month. And by 2025, we hope to make $497,460.
Rob, is the new Y-Frost reflected in any of these, or is it still so small that you're not projecting that here?
It is, some of it is reflected in this. Let me see the next slide, please, because I think that we may have a separate slide for that. No, it is projected in some of that, the previous slide.
Okay.
Yeah. In some of our expenses, our bank fees are going to go up from the 23-24, or, I'm sorry, they went down, not go up. They are going down. One of these reasons is because we have asked a lot of people to accept email as their statement method instead of us sending out paper. We've been trying to cut down on the paper waste and kind of make sure, that costs us less money. So the other thing is that we've also changed the way that we do credit card processing. So in the past, what we would do is we would run someone's credit card, and if it failed, we'd run it 4 more times. Well, each time you do that, there's a fee for just running the card, and that is really expensive. So we've cut that down to where we'll only run it like 3 times, and then, hey, there's a problem, we need to contact the customer. That's going to save us a lot of money in bank fees. Our conference and travel budget, we're going to increase just a little bit. I'd like to see the staff get out and learn some more stuff about some of the jobs that they're doing. More educated staff members make better staff members as far as I'm concerned. Excuse me. Our personnel budget is Actually slightly lower in the projection of the 23-24 budget. And one of the reasons for that is that we are not, at this point, again, these are just projections, we're not at this point looking to rehire some of the higher paid positions, if we can. What we need more are people on the ground doing stuff. And some of those other higher, the duties of those higher positions can be absorbed by management and other, like, you know, people who are already in higher positions. So you'll see that reflected, kind of saving us a fair amount of money going forward. We may have to reevaluate that and say, hey, are we working too hard? Are we getting things done? But that's why, you know, we make these projections.
Well, one example of that is that, you know, we used to have 2 network managers, now we have 1 and a business manager who still does that probably more than you'd like.
I'm happy to do it, actually. But yes, it's a lot, yeah, you know, and you know, that's part of the job.
Yeah.
So, I guess we can move on to the next one. Okay, so some of our expense projections, you can see our bank fees, while they, you know, were somewhat lower, are going to go up. You know, things cost more as you get more customers, you have more fees. Our building and facilities charges will continue to rise a little bit as well. You know, sewer gets expensive, more and more expensive, power goes up. I think Meg was talking about this earlier, right? Just, it's not flat. Again, we've tried to increase the conference and travel budget a little bit because I'd like to make sure that the staff that we have is trained well and, you know, knows what's going on with the current stuff. The consulting budget we have in there, it's going to remain kind of flat. We can't always necessarily do everything in-house, so when it's appropriate, we need to reach out to consultants and just get the things done so that we can continue on with our business. The postage office, the postage office fees are going to increase a little bit. You know, as stamp prices are probably going to go up, you know, things like that. So we're just trying to account for that. We found that our domain registration amounts that we were setting aside each year were a little low, so we're going to increase that by a little bit going forward. And our PG&E legal insurance is going to generally probably stay somewhat flat, although I'm a little unsure about the PG&E part of it, just because utilities tend to go up. So
I know at earlier times, there was discussion about moving the MCN offices out of its current location to Fort Bragg or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Is that off the table at the moment?
At this point, nothing is off the table, no. One of the things that I have in a slide coming up is some budgeting for a satellite office. There are possibly some projects in the future that may require or, you know, make it better that we have a better presence in Fort Bragg because it's a large population center. So, you know, to be determined, I guess, is the short answer. Yeah. Some more of our expense projections, as you can see, our digital voice and DSL equipment is actually going to kind of fall a little bit. One of our biggest expenses in some of the DSL equipment stuff was actually buying and selling the modems to the customers. We would generally keep a lot of those in-house, and so that's going to decrease a little bit. It's a negligible amount. As the years go on, people are going to gain in steps, and as you'll see, the personnel budget is going to increase. You know, in 25-26, we expect to spend, you know, $1,331,000. We also would like to increase our promotional and advertising budget. So it doesn't look like a lot, but you know, a fair amount of that can go a long ways. It occurs to me actually that some of this also goes back to some of our postage increases. As we do advertising, we do mailers. Someone buys a house, moves into town, they'll get something in the mail that says, consider MCN as your internet service provider. That does work. People have signed up with that. And you can see an increase in our wireless budget for equipment as we install new stuff, keep current with technology, things like that. And then our wholesale telecommunication costs actually go down. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where as we actually lose Fusion customers, this category goes down as an expense because we're not having to pay for the voice portion of it. We're just, you know. So there's some additional details here. This year, at least as the end of April, there was an 8% cost of living adjustment on our budget this year. We did have 45 open air installs, and that was without doing any installs for open air for about 4 months. We lost, is that 32? I can't see at this angle.
82.
82 Fusion lines, so a little less than expected. That goes back to, we were budgeted for losing 15, but we only lost about 11 per month. We added 53 digital voice customers, which every digital voice customer that we get is, you know, obviously a happy customer, but it's very good for our budget in the long term. We cannot order any new Fusion lines after February 1st. This kind of hit us a little bit earlier than we expected. We knew this was coming, but then suddenly it was here. And so we've had to sort of adjust and look at different products. And acquiring CK was one way to do that, to gain a customer base right away. Although there's an initial investment, I think it'll pay off. And those people, you know, are happy that we're serving them.
Where are they located?
Those people are located pretty much from Fort Bragg all the way up to Westport and a little bit beyond Westport. There's some access points up on Bald Hill, and that reaches all the way out to Westport. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The access point hits a relay station halfway from Bald Hill to Westport that then allows us to reach all the way out to Westport. And so far, the maintenance has been relatively low for them, other than the storms this year. They were very patient with us, but you know, storms happen. So there's going to be a certain amount of maintenance and making sure that customers have quality service too.
So they're on open air.
We are calling it open air long range. We have kept the speed profiles the same as they were with CK. So we've basically added another product line to our wireless. So in town where we can offer people open air, they get more speeds than you would in the open air long range.
So we're now marketing to all the other residents who weren't previous CK customers.
We are, yeah. Yeah, and if they're in areas where they'd like to change to open air and get more bandwidth for, you know, different price structure, we can look at doing that. So far that hasn't happened, to be honest, but it's not, you know, we wouldn't say no to somebody, I don't think. This is really just about getting the customers what they need and want.
I mean, I'm thinking of the area, you know, north of Fort Bragg, just, you know.
Like Cleone?
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, so there's the rub. Like for us right now, our open air service, I'm going to call it our native open air service. From there at Bald Hill, it kind of shoots down into Fort Bragg, and it doesn't really shoot over to the Cleone or northern area. Now, the open air long range that we acquired from CK does shoot in that more northern direction. But I have to say, Cleone's in a bit of a shadow. There's not, you know, you have to be kind of further out to be able to see some of the stuff for the 10-mile area.
Okay.
Who knows when Wyfrost might be coming to that area, though, so that might be an option. We'll see. Yeah. Next slide, please. And some more additional details on the next slide. Is that it? I thought there was one more.
I don't think you've gone over this, so.
There it is, yeah. So, in 23-24, there's not going to be a COLA, cost of living adjustment, or so we've been told. So we're kind of budgeting for that appropriately. There is still a $40,000 CK customer expense. We'll pay off during this 23-24 year. We're looking at some more money in server upgrades to the tune of about $40,000. We put about $18,000 into the budget for office rent, you know, as a possible satellite office in Fort Bragg. We realize that, you know, our customers are in a lot of different places, and if a lot of people are in Fort Bragg and they can come in and pay a bill, get something, and it's more convenient for them, it's probably worth it, and they're gonna.
So are you talking about moving the equipment move? Will that be in the Fort Bragg office is your idea?
Yeah, basically this next line, is that what you're asking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have a facility right now in Sacramento at TPX, which is a co-location facility, and it costs us $24,000 a year. If we can move that equipment into Fort Bragg, where we're now going to get a larger amount of bandwidth, we can save ourselves a fair amount of money.
So you're going to have square foot rental and electricity costs, but you're saying even after those expenses, you'll save about 24,000?
Yeah, and that's a really good question and point to bring up, because we're looking at actually trading some rack space for power and square footage for another company in town at that location. Because they want to have some servers in there as well. They know there's good internet connection, that kind of thing.
Good.
I mean, I know the original reason that Sacramento became the server location was redundancy of internet. Do we have enough
Yes.
redundancy now in Fort Bragg that somebody running into a pole isn't going to shut down the internet?
Well, I mean, this is something that we have to consider. I think the risk is tolerable at this point.
Uh-huh.
We have had an outage occasionally here, all the way up in Fort Bragg. Interestingly enough, that you brought that up, because the gentleman who owns CK was talking about building some bandwidth over to Bald Hill and selling to the county, possibly the city of Fort Bragg. So if and when that comes to fruition, that could be an alternate path that in a storm, a natural disaster where there was a fiber cut, we could take advantage of something like that. So I think the real question here is it worth saving $24,000 a year for a potential outage from a fiber cut in Fort Bragg? At this point, I kind of feel like it is, because we've got to do something to continue to build our net funds back up. And I think it's an acceptable risk. So, I mean, if you don't, please speak up.
I mean,
Say something.
Is Fort Bragg served by two different companies offering fiber connections?
It's not. There is AT&T fiber that comes in only one direction. Currently, that fiber travels over travels over Highway 1 down to Mendocino,
Right.
which is more of a hub where it travels out the Comchie-Kaya Road and then south down to Elk and beyond. Is AT&T going to build a redundant fiber to Fort Bragg? That would be really nice, but I don't know if they're going to do that anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
I think business-wise, if there's a issue that we all lose a little service for, a number of hours or a day and a half, that's tolerable. I think the question I have is, what infrastructure requirements would we be letting down if we don't have internet in case of a natural disaster?
I'm sorry, I don't quite.
In other words, like,
Yeah.
is the fire department going to be counting on us? Is the police department, are people not going to be able to be notifying 911 if they have problems? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been wanting to research is actually a localized switch, so that for our digital voice customers that are on our services here in this area, they could be connected to a localized switch, and then in a disaster scenario, that switch could kick in and local calls could be made. Right now, it's kind of up to people driving around, ham operators helping out, which is really great. I saw a Starlink satellite on the PD in Fort Bragg, meaning they're aware if there's an issue, they still need to be able to call out, find some way to,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, there may not be an issue, but I would just think that's probably a question you'd want to make sure that you're comfortable with before you make the decision. I love the idea of saving 24,000, but.
Yeah, and we will have to invest that $24,000 this year in terms of moving costs, making sure we have adequate air conditioning, generator space, that kind of stuff. So, do I think this is an acceptable risk? I do, otherwise I wouldn't have proposed it and put it into the budget. I think that, you know, where the MCN building is now, in the past, there were really big storms, trees could come down and actually damage the equipment itself. We're looking at putting our stuff in Fort Bragg. The equipment may go offline in a major issue, but at least it will still be there and undamaged, most likely. So, okay.
So we currently have a generator operating, you know, for the open air system, right? I mean,
we do.
At the
Right
parents-
now is
Parents and
manual
Friends.
intervention. So at
What?
3 in the morning, when the power goes out,
Right.
one of our technicians
Has
has
to
to
get
run
up
down
and
there and
turn it
plug
on.
in the generator, hit the transfer switch.
Right.
And, yeah, and we've always done that, so. It will be nice to have an automatic transfer switch coming up here in the wintertime.
so
Then we just
is,
have to worry about the remote sites, which are all battery backed up, and, you know, some have solar panels to keep going on their own, but,
Right.
yeah.
but is that co-location area going to be merged into this potential office server room, or will it stay where it is and, because it's working, it's doing its job?
To be determined, it depends on what sort of office space we were to get. You know, if we kind of invest in this, my thought, at least for the next 3 years, is it's gonna be, the co-location stuff will be where the co-location stuff is. And if we have an office, unless it has adequate room to accommodate that stuff, you know, we would have to reinvest money to bring it up to a standard for cooling and electricity and that kind of stuff. And at this point, I just, you know, I want it to be safe, working properly, secure, you know, and at the same time, save us some money so that we can grow into the future. Yeah, and then, again, you know, we're gonna be offering the Y-Frost service. We're gonna start offering it in Mendocino. That we're really hoping will do well, but we won't know until we fully complete our testing. So I've got a list of some beta test customers that are up. One of the things for that, as well as some other wireless services that I'd like to see deployed in Mendocino, is we're waiting on some bandwidth from our bandwidth provider. So we're gonna have to deliver that to the MCN office to get it there.
Have you thought about that, you know, AM radio tower that's on Prairie Way?
Yeah, up on 409 there?
Yeah.
I've thought about it, I've considered it, I've thought about it some more.
I mean, before, it wasn't that great for the open air because there's still too many trees in the area, but if
Yeah.
this is a service that doesn't need that issue, it would be,
biggest
there's
issue
a
is
concentration of population there.
Yeah, the biggest issue is getting bandwidth there.
Uh-huh.
And that tower, as I understand, is, I think there's some question as to its age and is it sturdy enough. Again, being a hot tower, we'd have to hire some pretty expensive people to climb and put stuff up there. Not that that takes it off the table, but
Well, then the other alternative would be Matheson Peak, because they do have internet there.
they do. In fact, as I understand, the school district has a transmitter on Madison Peak. One of the things about the Y-Frost initially that we've discovered, but again, we kind of have to confirm this, is it doesn't have if you can see it from 25 miles away, you'll be able to make a connection. You know, it has a bit of a shorter range of about 6 miles, maybe 7. And that, so again, we're conducting testing and we'll know some more once that's done. I don't want to overestimate, you know, I'd rather.
Well, I mean, I know that Further Reach has transmitters on that tower, too.
They do, and those are probably 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz maybe, you know, that are going to customers at least.
Right.
And then I don't know what they use for their backhaul. I would imagine 60 gigahertz or, something around there.
Yeah.
Which does require direct line of sight. That's the cool thing about the Wi-Fi service that we're finding, is that it does not require direct line of sight. It should work through trees. It's like TV service. So it uses the same space that the TV antennas did.
I know the Pacific Bell was given millions of dollars to erect transmission towers for cell phone service throughout the county.
Right.
And I know they didn't ever do the one in Compshe because it didn't serve downtown Compshe, the location they had chosen. But
Right.
I think at that point, there was going to be one in Rancho Navarro and one in, Boonville, and I'm not sure where else in Anderson Valley, but I mean, I'm just trying to think that there are going to be locations that are, that if you've got a service, that isn't line of sight dependent, might be able to deploy fairly easily in different locations.
That's a good point. I mean, sharing tower space is, I think, very, very important. Sometimes finding ways to do that, is a challenge, but, I would be all for it, I would say. Anywhere we can share tower space and kind of, work together, that's the idea, right? So the last part of the slide, really, we've talked about before, we're still considering a decrease of 11 customers per month in the Fusion service.
So you're thinking 18,000, so 1,500 a month is what your office space is going to cost?
Yeah, that's, I'm hoping less. I'd like to see less, but obviously less money you pay, the lower quality of an office space, or the lower amount of square footage that you'll get.
How many square feet are you needing?
Well, it's hard to say. It depends. If it's just going to be a satellite office and some of our employees will be there, but not all of them, what's that? I don't know. I'm not great with square footage. How much is 1,200 square feet? 600, give me some context here.
Well, this room is probably
30 by 50, so 1,500?
1,500 square.
Yeah, so we definitely wouldn't need as much as this gym, okay? So context-wise, a little more than half, or I'm sorry, a little less than half, I would say. So what's that, like 700-800 square feet-ish?
800, probably with utilities, you can probably get something for $1 a square foot, so you should be able to work with that budget there.
Okay, yeah, and that also considers if you put up some walls and have some office spaces and, a nice break area for your employees and, adequate restrooms, that kind of thing. So, yeah. I think that was the last slide. Yes.
So you took over about a year ago, a little less than a year ago.
Yeah, a little less, October.
And how would you characterize your first year as business manager and what you've learned, and is MCN a viable business that can be profitable?
Where do I even begin? Yeah, it has definitely been an eye-opening experience for me and an honor. I do think that MCN can be a viable and profitable business. A lot of the community likes to support MCN because we know that we do give some money to the schools, and quite honestly, we have a really good staff, and I don't think we could have lasted as long as we have without the staff that we have. A lot of credit goes to them, really. So, yeah, I still have a lot to learn. I'll say that, but I've definitely learned a lot. It amazes me at how much the community really loves us and is behind us, and I've tried to make sure that we're behind the community too, because reciprocating that is pretty important. So yeah, it was a lot more work than I expected, but I'm happy to do it. As I said to Jason when he offered me the job, I said, sure, it sounds like fun, and it has been actually. So.
Any other questions for Rob? Mark?
No, I don't have any at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you
Thanks,
guys, I
Rob.
appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate it.
So our third item for tonight is the presentation of our 23-24 LCAP, Local Control Accountability Plan.
All right, let's get to it. So first in the LCAP, we have our budget overview for parents, which shows for next year where our projected revenue is coming from. And from the quote LCFF funds, we all know that we get our funding from property taxes. The projected amount that is generated based on the enrollment of high-need students is $589,000 this is for next year. So next year, we're going to have to spend $589 in the LCAP.
And this year was.
This year,
440, I
that
think,
was
right?
For
450, or 415
right.
was what we think we needed, but we spent 450. All right, so getting into the actual plan, the general information, the reflections, they're pretty similar to last year. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but our strengths continue to be our CTE, in the LCAP at least, in our CTE pathways, and our counseling staff, as well as our EL staff. Our chronic absenteeism remains high, and our scores on the ELA and math assessments are pretty low for our low-income students.
Now, you have in that box there, the unduplicated pupil count is 65%, which is a lot higher than what Meg was using to determine the concentration funding. So
this was straight out of our CalPADS report. So that's, yeah.
So you and she should get on the same page, so we're using the same number.
Right.
Is the 65% that pupil count, is that enrollment count or ADA? So LCFF is calculated on ADA?
I think this is enrollment.
Yeah, I think so too.
So maybe that's your answer.
But I mean,
Because the ADA would be lower.
let's see, how do I want to, if the pupil count is 65%, are you saying that they're absent so much more that when you calculate their percentage of ADA, that it drops down to 50
Yeah,
something?
I mean, back when we had, our enrollment was 550, 525, our ADA was always 480. It was always quite a bit lower.
Right, but your percentage is you're not, you still got to compare apples and apples, right?
I think that's comparing apples and apples, though.
If your unduplicated count is 299, right? And yes, it's not 299 when you make the deduction for, average daily attendance. But if it's 65% of the student body, it's still going to be 65% of the student body. Unless the absence,
I think their absence.
unless the absence rate is more than double the non-duplicated students. And if that's true, that's a really critical number that we should be focusing on. Do you understand what I'm?
I do understand what you're saying. And these are the numbers we have. So, I mean, I guess that's the case. But I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, is that something you can research between now and
Sure.
the 13th? And
Sure. Meg, do you have any other thoughts on that? Like why that would be that way?
The only thought I would have on it is that the cohort projection model that I use to project the enrollment numbers. So is that unduplicated pupil count, is that for 22-23?
Yeah.
Or that's a projection for 23-24?
It is 22-23.
So that's an actual number for 20. I'll have to go look. I'll have to.
Yeah, James gets this from me from the CalPADS report.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look at it. I don't have an answer for you.
So it might influence the amount of money we have to put in for next year's LCAP too. I mean, if the funding numbers that Meg was using were based on something that's 10% less, 58 or something like that.
But hers is based on
Right.
ADA.
So what will happen with the LCAP, with the LCFF calculation, when P1 attendance data is certified, the state uploads that data into the LCAP calculator. And then for 22, or for next year, then it would be for 23, 24 P1, which is what we would probably use for second interim. That's the number it's kind of going to be looking at and grabbing, and we can change the number to be what we think it's going to be, but it's really going to be based on the attendance data. And so when we do the final calculator for the year, it's based on the annual attendance data.
Yeah, I get all that. I'm just trying to reconcile these two
Right,
line
right.
fairly different numbers. And if the lower one is accurate in terms of ADA, then that means there's a whole lot of chronic absenteeism in that group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have to have a look at it. I can't give you an answer.
And that group is now substantially more than the majority of the district students. Using either number. I mean, whether it's
Right.
Our
50
chronic absenteeism rate was in the 40s and 50s this year, so I'm not doubting that. That very well could be the case, that we do have students who struggle to get to school, and I bet that they are in this category. But we'll see.
Mhm.
I already talked about that. So the other thing, the LCAP is made up of really 4 areas, and we'll get into it, but the other one, the big area that we have focused on is the English learners. And so again, this LCAP is, this is the second year of a 3-year LCAP, so we don't really change much as far as our goals. We're not really allowed to change our goals. And then next year, when we build our LCAP for 24-25, that's when we create all new goals, and we have a whole new document. So getting
I'll wait till you get to the sections, but it seemed, you've got the 3 last year, this year, and the year ahead, right?
Yeah.
And there were lots of times when it seemed like you said that we didn't have data from 2022 yet. Well, we now have that data. And why can't we put that into those blocks?
Well, let's get there.
Okay.
Let's find out. So the stakeholder meetings were not attended. We had one parent show up to the parent meeting, and then I met with the staff, both staffs. All right, so goal 1 is all about our our English learners, and here we have our metrics that we report. So we created a spreadsheet with all of our with all of our students, and we are tracking their LPAC scores, and we'll be able to tell you how they are progressing. They all showed progress this year, except for 2 went down, and that could be for a variety of reasons, but just about every student showed progress.
So here, in your box, year 1 outcome, you say data, 21-22 data was unavailable by June 22. It's now June 23. We should be able to put that data in there.
Well, the data is in the spreadsheet. I'm not reporting on the actual individual score. Like, I'm not.
But okay.
So,
I don't understand the purpose of the sentence then.
Back last year? This one?
Yeah,
Well, when this LCAP was done last year,
right,
the 2021-22 data was not available.
right.
So that's just the same, that column is showing what was in it last year, and it remains the same?
I don't touch this at
You
all.
don't change it?
I don't touch this year 1 outcome.
Because the year-on outcome can't change.
Well, it could change, it seems to me. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is if the 21-22 data says something, then why don't we say what it said, even though we're reporting it months later?
Well, I just think I could have taken that sentence out. So maybe I should have just taken that sentence out, because all of the data is now in the spreadsheet that we are tracking our individual students on.
Okay, then
For that one.
I think
But the
that-
other ones, you know, I think, so in this one here, so I think, don't get caught up on that one, I guess, because this is a spreadsheet that I'm not actually showing you. It's more about tracking our students.
I get that.
Oh, okay. So then for this one, let's just say, this data was not available, right? But now it is. So I reported on it. But the 2022-23 data is not available. So again, I could have written the same sentence for, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it sounded like it was incomplete, and we should be able to put in, if we're reporting something about the data, then we should say what it is.
Well,
and-
I'm not summarizing it yet, because I want to show a 3-year period. So on this
Okay.
one,
So
this is
I
over-
would
this
take the
is over
sentence
a-
out.
Okay, I'm not really supposed to,
Oh.
because we're not supposed to go back
I
and
see you're
change.
changing the
okay.
metrics,
So
the matrix.
this is over a 3-year
Okay.
period, but you can see otherwise, when the data wasn't available this year, it is now. So I understand what you're saying. I don't think I'm supposed to do that. Because would change the LCAP that was approved. All right, so then we have measuring the participation in the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and then how they performed on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And then we have the desired outcomes for next year, and these are all very high goals that we put in here, but we'll see if we can reach some of them. Something to point out here, having a dedicated EL teacher, we have reclassified 9 students to date this year, and I think the number is we had 11 students reclassified in the previous 5 years. So to have 14 in 2 years, actually 14 in 2 years, 11 in the previous 5 before last year.
So
So that's good.
once a student has been reclassified, do they then not become part of the percentage meeting the standard? They're not
Right.
part of that equation?
They're not, right.
So, but it would still be interesting to know, it doesn't say one way or the other whether they met the standard or not. Being reclassified doesn't assume that they've met the standard. You could be reclassified
Right.
and not meet the standard, right?
Sure.
So
Well, no, they have to meet certain requirements. You're talking about just for the standardized assessment?
well, I guess, to use data properly, to me, numbers have to mean something.
Okay, so which one are you talking about?
Well, I'm saying, we've got in the year 2 outcome,
Yes.
second year, percentage of EL students meeting the standard in math was 17%.
In 21-22.
Got it.
Yep.
And okay, that's a number. But now we get to the next thing, which throws it into question. 9 students have been reclassified to date in 22-23. Does that mean they're part of that, that statistic of
Yes.
17%?
Yes, they are. Because they were not reclassified until this year.
Till this year, okay.
So they were part of this group last year.
So it seems to me that you're shortcutting, I mean, if they've been reclassified,
It depends, so it also depends on when they have been reclassified. I don't know when the state considers them no longer an EL student. I wonder if it's the whole year they're considered an EL student. I don't know that answer.
I mean, the goal here is 50% of EL students meet the standard in math. And yet, you're constantly changing the goalpost if you're not really looking at the students. The only time that you're looking at the same students are when
Yeah,
they
when the
haven't.
same ones do it.
They haven't been reclassified.
Sure, I understand that. So we could have chosen a different desired outcome, where we look at, I mean, it's hard to come up with these desired outcomes. I mean, give me an idea for one though, because I think you're never gonna have the same students taking the same test, right? Because you're gonna have 10th graders, 9th graders who don't take the test, who are EL students. You might have seniors who don't. You might have K1, 2, and then they turn into 3rd, 4th, 5th. So it's hard to come up, you know, this is something that we have to measure, the percentage of students meeting the standard in math and ELA. So this, I understand what you're saying. This is not a cohort, but I don't know how else to measure that. I don't know what a reasonable measurement is.
Well, they tell us how we have to
Yeah, right here.
manipulate the data.
Yeah, right here. The desired outcome is not something they tell us.
Right, but they tell us how to handle people who are reclassified, how to handle people that,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't think it's as useful as it could be in terms of telling a story.
I agree completely. The LCAP is not a useful document. It is not a useful document for us,
I mean, I would like to,
because we get no money for it.
to be
And
to be a story, something like, in 2021, we had 25 English learning students. Over 3 years, over half of them, what's the word we use?
reclassified.
Were,
I think I'm going to be able to get that. The most important goal is this first one right here. So finally, we have all of our students, all of our EL students in one place. We have their standardized test scores in one place. We have their LPAC scores in one place. And so that is what I will be able to show you next year. I will be able to show you how all of our students have progressed over this 3-year LCAP period. You know what I mean? Like, that is exactly what that first goal is all about. But I only have 1 year data, 2. I mean, I guess if they've been in the program. Because I haven't received the scores yet for this year. I could break it down even further though, and maybe say, for this if you want, which we can look at for the next time we do it. But instead of saying that, we could say, we've identified 5 students, and we're crossing our fingers that they continue to be our students, and we can measure them in third through 8th grade or something, So then we do have a cohort measurement instead of just the bunch, because that's all of them. But I think the bottom line is that this is an important stat, that 14 students in 2 years have been reclassified, because now we have a dedicated EL teacher who is providing those regular services. Should I keep going?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. At the end of the goal, we have to report the differences, the substantive differences in planned actions and expenditures, how we are doing in making progress toward our goals, and then what will be different in the next school year. All right, for goal 2, this is all about our low-income students and improving outcomes for them. So again, we have certain things that we must measure, that the state tells us we have to measure. And one of them is chronic absenteeism. And you can see that that number went up the last measurable year from 22% to 42%. But of course, remember, we were in COVID times here. But pre-COVID, we were at 25%, and now we're at 42%. I only expect this number to be just as high this year.
And again, the trigger point is 10 absences a year, right?
It's
18.
18.
It's 10%.
Yeah, it's basically 2 per month.
So a little more than 10 per year. But so somebody who falls into that statistic of being chronically absent could be just at that 2 per month, or they could be 20 per month. And there's no way of
Right.
distinguishing them,
Right.
you know?
But we have that data, and we know who they are, and we are reaching out to them. We have our social worker, we have our principals, we have our engagement teams, we have our SST teams, we have our classroom teachers reaching out to parents. But it was a tough year this year because we were telling kids to stay home if they had a sniffle. And that didn't change until March, April. So. Also, parents, as soon as they got wind of COVID in schools, they would keep their kids home. As you recall, we had to close school half day early in November because we didn't have enough substitutes.
Jason, when students leave early, say for a dentist appointment or a sports, travel day, do those count as absentees?
No, they don't.
No, okay. But excused absences because you're sick does count
Yeah,
as absenteeism
if they're
still.
gone all day.
Right, okay.
All right, we have to go on and measure our suspension rates, how our low-income students are performing. Again, this is not cohort-based. So, the LCAP, our LCAP is really made up of our EL teacher, our RTI teacher, our counseling staff, and our elective teachers and our aides. Those are really what we
And the
have
social
here.
worker.
And the social worker, yeah, counseling staff, yeah.
I mean, you could argue that because the LCAP requires expenditures for these services, that it protects those positions in a different way than, other positions.
It does, but also, we could find other expenditures and we could do other things. If we didn't have these positions too.
But you'd have a harder time justifying that they were specifically directed to this
would.
group of students.
We would have a hard time justifying some of these expenses that we do have in here, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
The RTI teacher, we have no way to prove that they're serving that number of unduplicated pupils. Our counseling staff, I think if somebody really wanted to nitpick here.
But I think that, again, as our concentration level rises, then it's clear that things don't have to be as directed, I mean, if you had 40%.
Well, yeah, once you get over a certain amount, once you get over a certain percentage, then you can go school-wide.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So we're there, especially with my number. 65%. All right, so goal 3 is improve student outcomes for all students. And this is a lot about basic needs. So teachers being misassigned in the school, Williams complaints, basic instructional materials, facilities in good repair. And then we have to measure, again, the ELA and math proficiency, the completion of A through G requirements for seniors, the completion of a pathway for seniors, AP results for 12th graders, and then number of elective classes we're offering, broad course of study. We also measure the K-8 writing assessment, and then our number students in work-based community internships.
That's an interesting change, those categories against your goal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that a cohort issue?
Well, you'd think so. I mean, the sixth grade, 42% last year compared to 39%, 69, 61, so probably, they seem pretty similar. All right, so one of the big changes next year is that we did reduce the RTI teacher for 6th through 8th grade. That was one of our budget cuts this year, so we had to find different expenditures to cover our costs for next year. All right, so goal 4 is school climate and family engagement. So we created a survey to send to parents. This was sent district-wide, K through 12. So last year we got 67 responses, and this year only 60. So not a good turnout as far as taking the survey, but the numbers are interesting. So feeling welcomed and valued when visiting the school. This is the number of parents who agree. So you could either agree, somewhat agree, disagree, or somewhat disagree and disagree. So I just took the very last one, agree. So that's what we want them to do. We don't want them to somewhat agree. So 83% feel valued and welcomed. 93% of them felt like their family's ethnicity and culture is recognized and respected. Timely communication in a variety of communication, 72% agreed with that. You can see how it's we've gone up in many of the categories from last year to this year, which is great. Understanding our information, it's easy to understand. This is a good one for number 5. We went up 20 percentage points for a number of parents who felt like their students, that they were receiving regular reports on their academic and social emotional growth. Communication with staff concerns, or staff with any concerns. And then decision-making, and how if they're an important part of the decision-making. The two that we scored pretty low on last year and this year, however, we did improve in both of these, was parents feeling that they were a part of the decision-making process for their school or district-wide programs, and then how many opportunities we provide for becoming involved in school activities. So we really need to look at that and say, how can we improve? How can we involve parents more? How can we get them participating more? Maybe we'll go back to having some of those we had math nights here at the K-8, or our book fair during parent conferences. We did that again, but we used to do a lot of those special nights, and maybe we could do more of those. Tobin and Kim both have monthly meetings, coffee with the principal and tea with Tobin. So I think if we can get back to meeting in person, that might encourage more students or more parents to attend those. All right. Chronic absenteeism, dropout rates, graduation rates are still very high. The suspension rates, this is a good one. This is interesting. From 18-19, 7.1% to 3.7. Of course, 0 during COVID to last year, 3.3. So a nice decrease at the K-8 as well as the high school. So pretty close to meeting that goal. But that's really a good number. That's really makes me happy, and I'm curious to know how we are this year. I think it'll be a little higher this year from what's been coming in to my office. I get copies of all the suspensions. We might be a little higher, but still I think we're pretty low compared to 18-19. All right, so the California Healthy Kids Survey was given during the 22-23 school year this year, and it was just made available today. So I will try to see if I can get a summary of the results before our next meeting. Yeah, or yesterday, so. All right, so that just about wraps up the LCAP.
So how are we spending money differently next year than we did this year? Because we also have to spend another $100,000 almost.
Yeah, I'm not, Meg, is that listed in here, or we just have to try and do it from memory? Like,
It's there in the table.
what page was that on, I wonder?
So
Oh,
this.
I think I'm there, 23,
Yeah,
24.
it's in the expenditure tables. It doesn't, the expenditure table doesn't tell you what we did. It doesn't have a comparison between last year and this year.
Okay.
So we'd have to,
But, so here we have the EL teacher 1.0. We have 40% of the RTI teacher, because she also works with EL students. We have our full-time social worker. We didn't do the aide. So then here's the rest of the RTI teacher. So we're essentially putting the entire EL teacher, RTI teacher, social worker, and then 60% or 50% of the counselor, the mental health counselor is in here. We have we added some aides potentially here. I'm not sure what the number was compared to last year. We're going to hire an elective teacher for the K-8 here, and we're putting the elective teacher there as well. So, because we are now over that percentage that we can do school-wide, so we are putting that position in there.
Jason, when they say that one line, that parents feel, I think it's around 33%, feel like they have a input in the decision-making, is that talking about the educational material, or what is that referring to? The reason I'm asking that question is you hear a lot around the nation now with parents unhappy with what schools are teaching, and generally it seems like it's a parent who walks in their room and they see what their kid's studying that night, it aggravates them. So do parents have much
get a lot of that
participation
here.
Well, I know I haven't heard that per se going on a whole lot here, but how does that even, the parents don't even really get involved in that normally, do they?
No, they don't. Even when we adopt curriculum, I think we have had parents serve on committees for adopting like an English language arts curriculum or a math program. So we have had parents serve on that. But I honestly don't think I remember like surveys going out or meetings other than board meetings to discuss them. But that's a good point.
So I think, if you were to go to the top of that chart at the bottom,
Yeah.
it would tell you what the total expenditure for 23-24 is.
Yeah.
Isn't it at the top? $947,000. And I think you showed on the original slide that we spent $415,000 this year.
Well, I think this is the one that we have to, this is the 589 is what, this is for the unduplicated. At the very top here, remember that 947. So this is what, is that for next year? Oh, yeah. So this is the total in the LCAP, but really the number that really matters is that 589 number.
Right, but I'm saying that if you looked at, if this is for next year, we're comparing, we need to spend 589, and we're spending 900, and go back.
I see what you're saying.
And then the one you just passed over for this year,
This one?
the numbers were 415 and 450. So we're doubling the amount of
No,
money we're spending. Isn't that the?
So this-
No, this
can
is
I-
just, go ahead, Meg, but isn't
So,
this, 415 is what
this-
we had to spend, we did.
Yeah,
450.
so this picture is showing what was budgeted for the high needs students. So I think this one actually might look back to the approved budget at 22-23. So when we first did the LCAP, when we adopted the 22-23 budget, the calculator calculated this 415. As we could go through the year, the number, like when you look back to my budget presentation, the number for supplemental concentration at the end of 22-23 is going to be like 440 or something like that. What we're actually spending, or we're actually going to spend in 22-23 on supplemental concentration dollars is the 450. So the number changes throughout the year based on the demographics of the students.
But what's
So
the, what's the?
what would the number be for
Yeah.
23, 24? For those
So
two?
Jason, go down to the chart, to the table, the expenditure table, where it had all those numbers running across the top. There. So go to the top right there. So this line, well, you can't see my cursor, can you? So the very top line where we have total LCFF funds, other funds, all that. So LCFF funds, that's supplemental concentration. That's the 589,000 that I showed that is calculated out of the calculator.
Right, and so that's equivalent to the 415,000 that we were
Yes.
just looking at.
Yes.
Right.
And then also in the LCAP, we spend a whole bunch of other types of funds. So we have other state funds. So I think we're spending some of those one-time dollar state funds in here. And then local funds, that's just the general fund. We have some COVID money included in here. And that's how we get to the total. Oh, I know, state funds might be CTE. But that's how we get to the total. Because the actions are LCAPable. They meet the goals and actions that Jason had been discussing earlier. Because some of these, like if we scroll down, like here in the federal funds column on the bottom of the screen, there's 18, go up a little. Let's see. Oh, okay, go down a little. See the 47,000 and the 217,302 there at the bottom of that page 32. Stop. Right there. The bottom of page 32.
Yeah.
Line 3.3, maintain 3.2 FTE elective teachers, and it goes down. But that hits all students, right? And so those dollars are, I think they were, that's LCFF, I think it was local and state is what those dollars are. And so those are hitting all students, but it hits an LCAP goal. It hits goal 3 and action 3 of 3, right? Action 3 and goal 3. And so that hits all students, whereas above where we hire a K-8 elective teacher or we do additional counseling, those are LCFF dollars in that first column. And those are actually aimed at the English language, foster youth, low income students.
So are we agreed that the amount of money that we're spending under the LCAP that we're required to spend has risen from $415,000 to $589,000?
Yes. And yes, so when we adopted the budget last year, the 23-23 budget, that was the initial number, the $415,000. When we are adopting now the 23-24 budget, and we look to see what the 22-23 supplemental concentration funds that we have to spend now, that's risen to 440 because of student demographics. So if we had student demographics that went the other way, that maybe, we had some, some of these unduplicated students left our area, then that number might go down. So it fluctuates throughout the year. And what we have to, when we make our budget, we have to show that we have the correct expenditures in the budget. By the time we do the unaudited actuals of this year, we have to show that we're spending what the calculator is projecting now.
I'm with you, I think. But I'm trying, you know, if we, in the current year, had a target of, a minimum of 415,000, and we actually spent 450,000. And our, the minimum we can spend next year is $589,000. And then what are we anticipating we're actually going to spend? So what's the equivalent to the 450,000?
The 589.
So we spent more than 450 though. So you're getting, so Meg, what did we spend total on the LCAP this year? Total.
So in your chart, there should be an unaudited actuals, or not unaudited actuals. There should be an annual the annual update table. And the annual update is showing what we're actually spending this year.
Okay,
so
that's going to answer your question, Michael. It's
so come over here in your bookmarks and scroll down. Oops.
Oh, sorry. No, it disappeared. All right.
Okay.
I can just open up last year's LCAP too, though.
Well, I'm just trying to.
But in here, there's an annual update table that shows what we spent this year, 22-23, on the 22-23 plan. What's above the carryover table?
Yeah, it's on 37, 38.
Here,
There
annual update. This is the annual, see, this is a 22-23 annual update, and these are actions that are contributing to supplemental concentration. So, so this is telling us at the beginning, okay, stop, don't scroll anymore. Okay, so this is telling us, and I'm looking at where it starts with last year's goal. Okay, so we have goal 1, last year's action, prior action service, contributing or not contributing. So everything that is contributing to increase or improve services hits the $415,000 or the 440, 450, because up at the very top, you see where there's right there, number 6, estimated LCFF supplemental concentration grant. That's what's calculated currently and what I showed in the budget for 22-23 that we must spend. Number 4 is what we calculated when we adopted the budget a year ago for 22-23. Column 7, this is what we're actually spending in 22-23. So we're spending $10,000 more about than what we're required to spend, if that makes sense.
Okay, so what I'm asking for is to, to get the, you know.
It's 956 though, isn't it, Meg? The total number that we're
For
spending.
the LCAP, the total
Yes,
number that we're
yes.
spending in the LCAP is 956.
Yes, that's the number that I want to, Mike, that's the one.
Where is that?
It's
Right here at the top of his.
That's the number that we are, so next year we're looking at 947, so it's very similar.
But the makeup is different because 589 is being spent on supplemental concentration, whereas in 22-23, 450 ends up being spent on supplemental concentration.
That's what I'm trying to get at, you know.
Right.
Is if we were required to spend in this fiscal year 440 and we actually spent 450, what is the equivalent numbers for that we're putting in the budget?
Well, what we're putting in the budget is 589.
589.
Right.
And so that's an increase of $140,000, or, you know,
Yes.
more than 25% more. Our required minimum is going
Right.
up by more than 20%.
Right. But I think what we have to be mindful of when we talk about these dollars, because we're basic aid, we have to carve out these dollars from our general fund. We're not like other districts where we're going to get new money. So it's hard for us to provide new services, if you will, because we're not getting any new money to provide the services. We still have our same pot of money, but we have to use a larger amount now to provide these services. So for us, it's kind of like this juggling game. We have to figure out with the staff we have, how can we meet the requirement? Because we can't hire any more staff. We can't afford it.
So we're not spending more money, we're just reallocating money.
Right.
But I mean, I guess where I started with this is that if the amount of money that we're required to spend is increasing, and the salary, the people in programs that we've identified as meeting our LCAP responsibilities are the most logical ones that we could have. It makes it more difficult to terminate those programs and people, because otherwise we'd be, stretching credulity in terms of applying the LCAP to things that are harder to say that they benefit unduplicated students.
I agree with that, Mike.
Right.
It's going to be hard as we need to
Right.
cut staff, but we need to show that we have staff that support a larger total dollar amount of LCAP required items.
Right,
Yeah,
but I mean,
that's-
it almost puts
It's a push and a
restrictions
pull.
on, what we can,
It's probably something we need to consider in making decisions.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. That's the
I-
point I'm trying to make.
Totally get what you're saying. Totally get what you're saying.
It's a valid point.
I have a comment.
Yeah, Mark?
Tell me if I'm missing something, but this sounds like insanity to me. And the reason it sounds like insanity is that we're a very tiny district. We have more money than most other districts. We have more resources than almost all the districts in California relative to the size of this district. In most other districts, to have a social worker, you have to have a student population of something like 10,000 students, not 450. It seems like we're just being compared to ourselves, even though we offer more services to these specific students. In my impression, we still have to offer more compared to ourselves, and that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, but it's a state required hoop we have to jump through that supposedly we get money from, but we don't get money for. So we are living in cuckoo world, really.
Right.
So I agree with you too, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's we have the pie of dollars, which is pretty finite and fixed. We're not getting a whole lot of new dollars every year, as Meg was saying earlier. And here's a category where, because of our changing demographics, the amount of money that we have to reserve in our LCAP has gone up over 20%. And in order to spend that money honestly, if we're, have the goal of spending that money for the the unduplicated count students, it's putting more pressure on other programs that aren't eligible for that LCAP funding.
Yeah, but I don't think we should sit around and try and solve a problem that
No,
that Jason
no,
hasn't
I
identified for us.
it's something I hadn't
What I'm
realized
hearing is
today.
he's having an okay time right now
Yeah.
coming up with the amounts from the various
Right.
personnel. I mean, I would argue bus transportation serves low-income students, right?
Right.
Could we attribute some of our bus transportation
That's a good question.
to supporting our low-income students? We're trying to get them to school to solve chronic absenteeism, right?
Right.
That's something we
Right.
don't have to do, but we're doing.
Yeah.
So I don't want us to try and solve something that Jason might be able to solve on his own.
So Meg, Tobin has a question. Can grant funding be used to meet the increased monetary requirement, or only the LCFF funds, basic aid funds?
So for LCAP purposes, the contributing to increase or improve services has to be supplemental concentration dollars.
So it can't be,
We have to show that coming out of the general fund, unrestricted dollars, we are spending $589,000 to increase or improve services for the unduplicated students. We can put, so we could put like CTE dollars in the LCAP, but that's not that's not going to go toward our 589,000
I see, so
requirement.
I got it, okay.
Jason, is this document like set in stone, or can it be changed still, revised? Okay. Can I just make 2 points? Bottom page 3, there's a sentence that says, in 2023-24, Mendocino Unified School
Hold on a
District.
second, let me open it up again.
Sure. It's the very last paragraph at the bottom
Page
of the
3?
page. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. It says MUSD is projecting it will receive $589,206 based on the enrollment of, et cetera, et cetera. We're not actually receiving that. Should we reword that a little bit? I'm sure it's boilerplate because other schools do receive those funds, but.
Is that something that we could change, Meg, or is
So
that?
in,
I don't-
unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, I
So
don't think so.
It's locked
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
the form.
No, in this budget overview for parents, what happens is there's a chart, if you will, a table, and we input the dollars in the table. We input
Gotcha. And the rest
everything
of
in
it
the
is a
table.
template.
And this template chooses the words.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my only other thought was going back to Michael's very first, early comment on this, the first goal on,
Yeah.
right, the data from the year one outcome
Yeah.
wasn't available by June 2022. Maybe in the very first row there, when we first say that, it's being monitored on a dedicated spreadsheet, maybe it can say that we now do have the data for those years, which will then explain
So
why it's
so you
below.
can see that we had baseline and then year one outcome, and then, so now that I have data, you can see that I didn't put that sentence in there anymore. Even
Right.
though I still don't have the data for the previous year, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm
So,
just saying in that first row, maybe just saying
but I
that we
can
do
do
have
that,
the data.
but it was just
So
for
then
this
it
year
makes
one.
sense to show the data in the next
Yeah,
rows.
it was just
might
for the year
be-
one comparing it to the baseline, that was all, so, sure. Or I can just change it.
Wait, I agree with you, Jason. I don't think you're supposed to change year one.
Yeah,
Right?
I think we
mean,
can,
What?
just say we now have
Yeah, but
data for that.
take my chances with the LCAP, please. Yeah, I will do that. Emily?
Okay. Otherwise, looks great to me.
Certainly, we're all glad that we're not filling it out, that it's somebody else's job.
I was once the one parent in the room in the meeting, at the LCAP meeting a couple years ago.
I think you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Early
And where did it
training
get
for
you?
being a
Got
board
your
member
student
got me
board.
here. I know, what was I thinking? Exactly.
Oh, any other
there was one-
comments on the
Aaron was
LCAP?
too, yeah.
Mark?
Nothing else.
Well, then I think we're done.
Yep.